All right, we are going to move on to feedback. And I know last week that was an area where some people were confused between self disclosure and feedback. That was what the quiz was on, and I know there was a level of confusion. So, there are some similarities between feedback and self disclosure in that feedback is going to be helping a client maybe feel normal about the situation that they're going through. And it could really kind of provide just a sense of overall ease. It could be a reflection of feedback is also, or sorry, a reflection of feeling is also a type of feedback. But feedback is going to be confirmation or affirmation that you're hearing what your client's saying, that you're tracking with them, and it could actually even be advice that you give to them. It could be a summary of, okay, what I hear you saying or what the theme of this seems to be is this, and that would be appropriate feedback. That's different than self-disclosure because, again, self-disclosure is something where you are disclosing something of yourself. So exactly what the word means. Self-disclosure is disclosing something about yourself. Feedback is not necessarily disclosing something about yourself. You're not bringing your own story into the process. Feedback could also be something like asking your client what it's like to hear themselves saying certain things. It could be a statement such as, it sounds a lot like you're going through this, which is kind of a little bit of that higher level response. But feedback is anything that you're giving back to the client based off of what you're hearing from them. It's that confirmation and affirmation, but it's definitely different than self-disclosure. Reframing and interpreting a client's story go hand in hand. So we know that reframing is definitely something that you could use to help the client see a different perspective. Interpreting goes along with it because we're able to help the client see the perspective that they're coming from, as well as maybe once they've reframed the situation, a different perspective that they're coming from or a different way that they could interpret the situation. Reframing, though, is very interesting. A lot of times people think about reframing is when you have a client who's focused on something negative and then you have to reframe it to something positive, or what can you learn? And that is definitely something that is a part of reframing. But reframing actually gives you gives the client a broader perspective, not necessarily only the positive perspective. So we could look at the alternative or the flip side to it. You could look at other people's perspective of the situation. You could look at different ways of thinking about something. So for instance, I have a client that I work with who's very sensitive to criticism from her extended family about the relationship that she's in. She's in a very healthy relationship, but her family doesn't necessarily always respond well to that. And so in a recent session, we talked about that a lot. And we talked about the different relationships that her extended family was engaged in. And we found that the extended family was not in healthy relationships. And here my client was in a very healthy relationship. And so as we reframed it, we thought, well, what would it be like to listen to those comments, knowing that perhaps your extended family is jealous of the relationship that you have, or that they're sad that they don't have a relationship like that. And what my client was able to do then was not internalize those comments so much. It didn't feel so much like criticism or bitter feedback, but rather she was able to understand it and approach herself in the situation in a different way. So that would be a way that you could use reframing. So again, that's reframing. Interpretation is how your client is viewing the situation, or it can also be how you hear them talking about the situation, so your interpretation of it. All right, nonverbals in working with your client. Of course, all of you guys are very, very aware that nonverbal communication is one of the most important types of communication. That is where we're going to get a lot of feedback from the client themselves as far as what's really going on. So simply put, nonverbal communication is the communication that we use when we don't use our words. It could be sitting like this. It could be a roll of the eyes. It could be, a really intense stare. Anything like that. It can communicate where the client is at. There is a concept in emotions-focused therapy, which is something that I use a lot, or I call it EFT, where we ask a couple to lean into the other person. And that's both a mindful activity and psychological, mental, emotional, as well as physical. So when I talk to a client about leaning into the situation, leaning into the emotion that their spouse is feeling, I actually physically lean in while I'm talking about that. And what it provides is a physical example of what I'm asking them to do on an emotional level. So we as therapists also need to pay attention to our nonverbal communication, the way that we sit, how we look at a client. Are we off looking around? Are we making eye contact with them? Are we sitting, in a posture that might not demonstrate openness or might demonstrate stiffness instead of comfortability? So nonverbal communications are not only a way that we can tell where the client's at, but a client interprets our openness as a therapist by our nonverbal communication also. So that's kind of a recap of weeks 10 and 11, the different micro skills, that we are practicing. And we're just going to kind of leave it at that. You guys are getting a great grasp of how these different skills are implemented into counseling. You guys should be using these skills specifically each week in your counseling sessions with your partner or your partners. And that is the point of these counseling sessions. So when we're talking about reframing in a specific week, that we're actually implementing that skill during our counseling session. So, upcoming week, very normal. We've got our group discussion board, we've got our counseling sessions, we've got our journal, we've got our quiz, we've got our reading. Nothing's new, but I will give you a little bit of hope that there is only 3 weeks left and you guys are doing absolutely fabulous. So, before I leave you for today, I wanted to give you one resource, and this is a book that I have found to be very, very wonderful. And for so many of you who are interested in families and family systems and counseling families and couples and individuals, this is a wonderful book and tool and resource that I've not only used, but I've given this information out to many clients. It is called The Dance of Intimacy by Dr. Harriet Lerner. And she actually has several books that they all start with the dance of. So there's the dance of anger, the dance of communication, the dance of deception. There's all sorts of books that she has written. She is a fabulous author. She's very systemic in her approach. So if you were to read this and pick out a theory that she uses, she is very Bowenian family systems. Is her perspective, but she is nationally acclaimed and for working with women in specific as well as couples and families. But this is basically, The Dance of Intimacy is a guide to courageous acts of change in key relationships. This is a wonderful way of looking at boundaries, triangulating, communication, family of origin, patterns of communication, habits, all of those sorts of things. Anything by Dr. Harriet Lerner is absolutely fabulous, but this was just one that I had picked out that I very much recommend and have come to appreciate both personally and professionally. So The Dance of Intimacy by Harriet Lerner, that's your resource for the week. Of course, I'm just giving these out to you guys if you want extra reading or resources for the future. You never have to feel obligated to read or watch any of these sorts of things, but this is just for your own kind of library of knowledge as you continue to grow personally and professionally. So with that said, I will leave you guys and we'll see you on the group discussion board this week. Have a great day.